Hey, I'm Aditya, and today I'll be showcasing GSAM compiler, which will be the engine running for compiling and running the core for the GraphScript engine. GraphScript engine is a product or basically an engine which can be used for scripting visually. Right now, it's in development, and we can drag and drop blocks and have this 2D surface like scripts. So, I'll be showcasing its backend because the front end is still in development and it may take some more time for this. Um, so, over here we have the source code for the GSAM compiler, which stands for GraphScript Ain't Markup because it's a scripting language. It's capable of compiling the visual scripts in form of other languages, and it makes this possible because it has a node like structure, a graph like structure in the script itself. It's those scripts which are also known as 2D scripts. Well, it's not exactly 2D script, so let me show you an example. So here we have the command and then its argument passed with indentations. So it can be converted easily into a 2D script for easier code execution, and basically it uses the concepts of graphs and related algorithms to execute the code. The engine is available on PyP for now. It's written in Python and it's object oriented and modularized as well. To install, we can use pip or pipx. So I'll demonstrate right now side by side. So right now I don't have the compiler installed right now, and I'll just type pipx, that is the pip which is available for Mac and Unix based systems, specifically for global installations if you have installed your Python using Brew. So it's if you have not installed using Brew, then you can just write simply pip install GSAM, but in my case I'll have to write pipx. Depending upon your Python version, it can also be Python 3-m pip or pip 3, or you can take help from Google searches to find what pip installation you have. So I have installed my compiler. It can be accessed using these terms: GSAM, GSAM compiler, GSAM compiler CLI, GSAMC, and GSAMC CLI. Now, you may need to add some variables to the path for pip, not for the compiler. For pip, there might be some variables, so make sure your pip installation and Python installation is correct. Continuing forward to using GSAM, I'll just create a demo folder over here and I'll name it. Let's name it some good name. Let's call it GSAM samples, and I'll open it using VS Code. Um, all right, I'll just simply create a file now. Well, I'll by preference the default file name, although it doesn't really matter what the file name is since we will be passing it on its own, but for future projects I'll be making sure if a project is run, then it is always starting from entry.gsam. It can be configured separately. However, by default, if we do not pass any arguments, I'll prefer to use entry.gsam. Right now, it's it always takes the file and requires a file path, so it doesn't really matter what the file name is. But here we are. So let's try by outputting some demo code. The indentation is using one space, so Right now it's like really peculiar about this. The indentation should be one space only, and for each function, or what I call these as components, uh, the arguments can be passed by giving an indentation. So in GraphScript, essentially everything is a component and it will be connected to other components. This component based system enables us to run, to visualize as well the script in a 2D format, where it's more easy for someone who is starting to learn to code. Well, it might not be in the case of scripting directly, but in case of the visual engine, the visual scripting engine, it will be really helpful in that case. Continuing here, we can write hello world, or rather, let's type hello GSAM, and this when we will be running it. So I'll just type GSAM. So now you can see the GSAM command has been registered. In case you are not able to see the GSAM command, you might need to change your source, that is the default profile you're using. It can be usually accessed inside dot bash rc or zshrc. In my case, it's zshrc. However, since it is already registered, I don't really need to do it once again. So back to the code. Let's test our code using the GSAM. It can also be GSAM C and other variants as well, as we see here. But I prefer GSAM. It's simple and like really basic command. So I'll just give GSAM and then the file name we want to run. So that is entry.gsam, and it prints hello GSAM. Now you can see that it's printing like ending in same line. So I can just write end line over here. So end line is also a component. It's a literal component. That means it has a literal value, like going to next line. So if I just paste here once again GSAM, now you can see that it's going to the next line and then ending. Similarly, we can do something else. It also supports basic operators. So that is, we have add component. So we can add two numbers, let's say 1 and 2, and it should result in 3. Now it's not necessarily just one component. We can add other components as well. Like we can add another component, let's say two outputs. We want to output 1 and 3, and then like we want to output the sum of 1 and 2, and then we also want to output the sum of or let's say the difference between 1 and 2, 1 minus 2. So I'll just write subtract 1 and 2. So it's minus 1. I'll just add an end line for clarity purposes, and now we can see 3 for the first and minus 1 for the second. Now, this might be really different from the generic programming languages, which use arguments in the next lines and more code in the lower lines. However, since it's all just components, so I have made sure to made it a structure like when we are indenting, then it's a add is a argument for output and 1 is an argument for add, and it will run from the most indented part to the least indented part. Now this is some basic output. However, we can also have variables. So let's say I create a variable I. It's called I, and let's assign it a value of 0. So basically what it does is it takes a string, and it also takes a value. This can be any value. It can be 0, it can be uh, let's say a string, it can be a true false value, it can also be some ghost reference which is kind of complicated to explain, but think it like another component, reference to another component, not exactly the same component, but a reference. So what I'll do now is run this code. So what will happen is it saves 0 to a variable called I. Now it really doesn't do anything, but if I try to output I, then we can see that it's printing 0 as float. Let's convert it to a string and it will print simple 0. We can have it as a true false value and it will give us the boolean value. Now it's not like I can type anything. In that case it can give error. However, let's do something like 0 and try using this in add. So I'll add 2 and I, and let's see the result. So the output should be 2. Okay, so the output should be 2, which is 2. Let's try changing this to 5 and it becomes 7. Now what's the purpose of the variables or dynamic data if we don't really have any user inputs? So if we want to take user input, we can rather have a component called input. This input component takes some argument, that is the prompt we want to show the user. So I can say give a number like this. So it will ask me for the number, and let's say I type 78, then it prints 80 because we have just added 2 in the output. Now by default, this add function converts the I into a numeric value. So if I say something like give true, so it will just give me 2 because by default a string will give a value of 0 unless it's a number. So if we want to convert it, let's say, to a boolean value which can give a 1 for true, so what I can rather do is before passing the I can convert it to a boolean. Now it will give us 3. So if I don't pass anything, it will give me a 2 because empty string is equivalent to false for boolean. Even the string false is true because it's a string and it has some characters. So as long as there is some characters, it will be analyzed into true. Otherwise, if there is no character, then it will be analyzed into false. So to see, I can just simply show you the boolean function along with some past hello. So it gives me a true. If I convert it back to numeric, that is if I want to convert it to a numeric value, so this becomes a 1. And if it's an empty string, let's just remove this value. Okay, it's not accepting the value, sadly. Okay, few bugs which I might need to fix. However, if we pass any value, then it will be 1. Similarly, if we pass 0, it should return false. Okay, now it should return false. And let's say I give any number that is other than 0, then it returns true. Now what I can do next is writing strings like this might be really confusing sometimes, in cases where it's really weird to see strings as like the input value, the variables. So for that, I have made sure to add some simplicity by providing, like, this is equivalent to this. So just instead of using quotes, you can just add a colon and say I, and this does the same work as before. So I'll just do I and 1, and let's do 4, so it should return 5, which is the case. So it's not just the variable names, we can also do it over here. So our hello example, we can write hello GSAM once again, and this should also work. Now, for such kind of situation, I would recommend to use the strings only, since we are using a literal value. And for situations like this where I have to declare a variable, I would prefer the colon, so that it's more clarified that it's not an argument but rather a value, or something like it's declared. But you can use both if you want to, like, it won't really make much difference, at least for this GSAM version. Now, going on towards a little more complexity, actually, before that, I'll just clarify a few types of base components. So, base components are basically like these literals. So, for example, hello in string, or the number 0 or 1 or minus 1 point something, or true or false. These values are base components, also known as literals for this language, and these are basically like very primitive type of data, and for data entries purposes. Moving forward, I can go towards the component. Like, we already have the component output, and it's doing something like printing out hello. So it might be possible that my component might need to be reused. So there might be a structure where we are doing something like add 1 and 2, then we are outputting add 1 and 3. So it's like really tedious to write so many stuff like about incrementing, just incrementing. So let's shorten this by making a component ourselves. So to create a component which is also a component, so this component will take a name. So its name is increment, or let's say inc, and it may take some args. Now we will give it a script which is not a string. Args will be a variable name and increment will be our component name. So we can access the arguments using the args keyword later on, which we will be in this case. So we have this, and let's say we have a variable, um, and we want to increment 1 to it. So we just simply add 1 and use the 0th element. So it will basically return a array, and it is 0 based array. You can check 0 based array from other sources and Google as well, but basically it means the items of the array starts counting from 0. So the first element becomes 0th element, the second element becomes 1th element, the third becomes second, and so on. So I want to access the first element, that is 0th one, and add 1 to it. However, this will not do anything because this is just internally performing this, and we want it to output something or do something with this. So what we can do is add an output, and we can just simply call increment 1. So this should return 2, and it's that simple. However, it might not really be that good, because what if we want to increment it twice? in that case it's not giving the output to to this increment. So to do so, we can just add a simple returns statement, and this shall return this the value of this result to the component above. Now it won't really do anything because it's returning, so we have to make sure that the return value is being used somewhere. Well, it's not really necessary, but since we are returning, why not use it? So I'll just simply print it, and now my value is 3. So we incremented it to 1. Actually, let's go for 0. So when we increment, it becomes 2, and when we increment it again, it becomes sorry, when we increment, it becomes 1, and when we increment it again, it becomes 2, which is the case. uh, so that's how we create a component. Now what if I want to do something like count? So in that case, we can utilize, we want to, let's say, count from 1 to 5. So what I can do is I can start outputting 1 and then end line. Then I can copy this and use 2 and then end line, then 3 and then end line, and then 4 and then end line, and then finally 5 and end line. However, this seems like, what if we have a value till 1000? We won't be sitting idle and just writing this. So rather we can, let's just show this. So this is the output. So rather than doing something like this, we can utilize the concept of variables and create a variable I, which will contain our current number, and it will start from, let's say, 1. And now instead of writing this manually, what I'll rather do is create a loop. Now loops will take a condition, and then while that condition is true, they will keep running their scripts. So what I can rather do is see if I, so I'll say less than equal. So while I is less than equal 5, so keep outputting the value. So, and what value? We have to output the value of I. However, this won't really work. um, okay, it printed bunch of ones, but it won't really work anymore. It will throw an error, like it just keeps on doing this. And then we hit the stack overflow because we are just adding I, but we are not really incrementing I. So to fix it, I'll just say script, so that it becomes a script. And what I want to do is, after outputting every I want to add 1 to I. However, this also won't work because we are just adding the values, but this value is not contributing, like it's not updating I. So we can see this again because it will give us the error once again. And to fix this, we'll just simply use the saves command, and once again we'll have to pass I as string. So now it works perfectly as intended. Now what if we have a condition? Let's say we do not want any even numbers. So in that case, we can do something like, let's say we have till 10, but we don't want any odd numbers. So we want to print only if it's even. Or let's say we want to do a fist buzz. Or let's try something more simple. um let's try and make a truth machine. So a truth machine is a simple application which takes an input, and if input is 0, then return 0 and end the program, else keep printing 1. So it's a simple program. So what I'll do is saves input, or let's say I, and then it takes the input of, so over here, since there is a space, so that space will be used, but there will be this problem that we can't really see it. So that's why I suggest that in this case we should use literals. All right, continuing. So we will have an output, sorry, input. This will be saved to I. Now if equals I and 0, in that case what we want to do is output 0 and then end. Otherwise we want to loop, and we want to loop in such a way that it's always outputting 1. Let's try this script. It will take input, let's say 0. I'll have to pass a script, I guess. Like there are bugs, a little bit of bugs. It is buggy a little bit. So here it's creating issue because it's taking 0 as number, but the I is a string. So I'll just convert the I to numeric. And now our output is 0 and our program ended. However, if I write 1 now, okay, I forgot, it should be 2. Is that why it's not working? Okay, let's continue with the script. If it works in the script. I mean, it's still a prototype, so it might be a little bit buggy. However, a lot of these are like still in progress. So here we see 1.0, 1.0, so on. So that was a truth machine. Now let's say we want to do some advanced functions. Let's say we want to do a factorial. So this is the final example I would like to show. So it's a factorial. So over here I will write the component name factorial, and it should take some args, and then it should run the script. And what it should do is, it should, let's say we are given a number n, then like we will be given it in the 0th index for args, like the first thing that will be passed. Okay, and then if equal, actually less than equal, 1, then it should return, okay, n less than 1, then it should return us the value 0 for less than equal 0. If it's not, then it can be then if okay equals x as 1, then we hit another base case, that is returns 1. And finally, if it is not, so the first line is condition, second component is if the truthy component, and the third is the falsy component. That is, truthy runs when the condition is true and falsy when the condition is false. So over here, what I will do is returns 1, but when it is not, then it should return the product, that is multiply uh, n with the factorial of subtract 1 from n. So let's just quickly run. So it does nothing because we haven't called the function yet. So I'll just call the function quickly. So I'll run factorial of 0, and let's also try factorial of 1 and factorial of 2. I know there are multiple ways to do this, and I just wanted to show that recursion is supported. So I'm doing it like this. So right now it's printing x. Where is x? Okay, n. It's not recognizing this. If I'll really have to check for the stuff over here. Script. I think this should work now. Okay, so it's working. Some places there are issues with this. I'll get it fixed in the future updates. So maybe after in 12 1.0012, I think I'll make sure to do this a patch. um, okay, up next let's get the output of these values. Output and output. So we get 0, 1 and 2. Let's also add end line. So let's go for the 0 part. Let's say actually I just make it a input. So I'll convert it to numeric input factorial of and then I can just print the value over here. Factorial of, let's say, 3. So that should be 1 into 2 into 3, that is 6, which is correct. Now since it's running from the most inner indented function, the component, to outermost, so what we can do is use some clever tricks like this. So I can say calculate value of factorial is, and then what I can do is calculate it over here. It will be calculated and only then it will be displayed, and then we can enter line. Factorial of, let's say, 7. I'm not sure about the value, I'll have to check. Let's do something smaller. Factorial of 4. 24 seems correct. I think 5040 is also correct. Yeah, so that's recursion along with if else. I'll have to fix the problem with if else. I'll check that later on. It's not recognizing these are scripts. Alright, so another thing is that it may not really be a single word. It can also be like, because it's a string, and the way this language works, we can also do something that is not available in most of the generic languages, that is adding space to the variables and component names. So I just said find factorial, and instead of writing factorial, find factorial, and this should work the same. Actually not, this will give an error over here. Yeah, it did. So I'll have to convert this as well to find factorial, and now it shall work. 24. Well, that's mostly uh, a brief overview of GSAM, GraphScript in Parkup, and the GraphScript engine, which will be utilizing this very soon in the future updates. It may really go under more uh, updates and redesigns. However, it will be running this GSAM compiler for now. For more samples, the samples folder in the project source code can be checked at aditya slash gsam compiler. There are some basic, and in future there will be more as well. So here's a doubler, here's the collections. Collections are basically lists, which I haven't really covered over here, but like we used the args of zero, args is also a list, and there are other operations for the list available, also using a custom component, a basic hello, a tomcat, and so on. Well, that's it for this. Um, this was the showcase of GSAM compiler. Um, I hope your experience with the compiler and the engine which will be available in the near future would be great. Thanks, that has been Aditya, and that's it.